Hey, it's Jordan. I am really happy to have presidential candidate Marianne Williamson with me. I only skimmed your book, but you have so many books. A Return to Love was a real classic. You are everything from a spiritual teacher to a healer. You've done really been a political activist for years, and you've also done great work on HIV and AIDS, dating back to the '80s when a lot of this started popping up. So I just wanted to ask you, this is your second foray into politics. You ran for Congress in California. What kind of made that light switch go off to go national and run for the White House?
Well, I don't think any of us are quite the same people we were before Donald Trump was elected president. And I think that I'm no different than anyone else in the sense that once that happened, something just opened up in all of us. How can I best serve? How can my talents be best put to use? And I don't see myself as any different than anyone else that way. Although not that many people got the message from their own heart, run for president, although quite a few people did too.
I wanted to ask you because you talk a lot about, you said America is in stage 4 cancer. And I go around the country, contrary to CNN reporters and these kind of corporate reporters who generally focus more on like controversy and scandal. For example, I just got back from Seattle where I was interviewing homeless people because homelessness is spreading all over the country. And there's really, in my view, an alternative reality where the national media focuses on like who's up and who's down. Meanwhile, the majority of Americans are suffering, living paycheck to paycheck, opioids, all these things. Can you kind of talk about that spiritual decay that you think it's not only about the policy, but about changing the spirit and the mindset of Americans?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out that I very much agree with you. You know, we have 41 million people in America are hungry. We have millions of American children who live in food insecure households, millions of American children who go to school each day in schools that don't even have adequate school supplies to teach a child how to read. And if a child can't read by 8, chances of high school graduation drastically diminished, chances of incarceration drastically increased. All of this underbelly of not only of human suffering, but planetary emergency in terms of the environment, national security agenda that's driven more by short-term profit maximization for Boeing and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman than for any serious agenda of peace creation. So number one, there is a moral dysfunction in the fact that we are in denial about these things. There's a moral dysfunction in the fact that they even exist, the moral dysfunction that underlies the political rot that leads to all that human devastation. And there's also a spiritual dysfunction in the fact that we distract ourselves from actually naming the problems as they are so we can solve them. So my campaign, as is your effort and so many millions of people, is one in which we think a kind of radical, fierce, authentic truth-telling is necessary. We can solve these problems, but not if we don't look at them. And the dominant political conversation sort of minimizes them. Homeless people probably aren't voting anyway. Children who are hungry, they have no financial leverage, they don't work, therefore how can they compete with the cloud of corporate forces flooding the halls of Congress? That's why I'm running.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get to policy, but real quick, you see with Trump that he really preyed on economic fear, desperation, and also racial sentiments of like the other. And then kind of you also see, I think, the Democratic Party is really pushing the Russian boogeyman and all these things for the foreign threat to our democracy. It seems like a lot of people are living in fear, some of it racially based, some of it economic based. What are your thoughts on that spiritually? Because I think on the left and the right, you see this nexus where people are joining in being a backlash to the economic kind of oligarchy, but there's also that fear underlying.
Well, first of all, it's not kind of an oligarchy. It is an oligarchy. It is the new veiled American aristocracy. I don't necessarily agree that it's a Russian boogeyman. I think there's something very real about what happened there. But I do agree that while the Republican Party has been bought hook, line, and sinker by these corporatist forces, the Democratic Party deals with the pain on the periphery, but for the most part refuses to challenge the underlying forces that make all that pain inevitable. Both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump acknowledged the economic despair of millions of people. It does not surprise me that this country was not going to elect someone whose basic theme was, let's just continue with how great things are. The only two people who acknowledged all that pain were Bernie and Trump. So there was going to be a populist cry of despair and rage, either with an authoritarian populist or with a progressive one, and we know what happened. I think that the call for change, the cry, you're not looking at me, you're not helping me, was legitimate and is still legitimate. So the fact that we got the sort of con artist change agents doesn't mean that there's still not economic despair to address. And I believe the kind of better version of same old from the Democrats is no more an ultimate or fundamental solution than is the old kind of status quo from the Republicans. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's better, don't get me wrong. We need a Democrat to win in 2020, but we need a fundamental disruption, not just a kind of sort of making things better.
Right. And I want to ask you, the Democratic Party, one of the complaints that I see on the road, particularly among Black Americans, is, well, you come around for the election time, but then you kind of disappear for 4 years. You've actually pushed as one of the prominent policies, reparations, not like, Bernie Sanders and others who have talked about, well, my policies will help Black Americans direct, reparations, similar to what Germany gave Jewish people for the Holocaust. Talk about why you think that's so important, and also what are your plans beyond just reparations for African Americans?
In order to transform our country, we have to apply the same principles necessary to transform an individual life, because all that a country is a collection of individuals. And there's a difference between fixing a problem and transforming things. Fixing is external. Fixing is inherently temporary. You can have something, you have a piece of legislation that then is reversed by the next president. We need a deeper level of response to the economic gap that still exists between white America and Black America, that is based on a realization of why that gap exists. That gap exists because back at the end of the Civil War in 1865, when Tecumseh Sherman, General Sherman, promised 40 acres and a mule, that would have given former slave population an opportunity to integrate into the economic condition of freedom. In most of the cases, that was not given. Even in the cases where it was given, it was taken away. And the end of the Civil War, or 2.5 centuries of slavery, was then followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence towards Black people. In the 1960s, we got to the Civil Rights Act so that we dismantled the mechanisms of segregation. Then we had the Voting Rights Act, which ensured free and equal voting rights to Black people, although with the chipping away the Voting Rights Act in 2013, this leading to voter suppression efforts, in many ways we're just starting all over again. We have still not responded to the issue of economic restitution, and I believe that it's time to do that. The difference between paying reparations and just something like race-based policies is that it acknowledges the debt to be paid. It acknowledges that a wrong was done, and that's very different than just race-based policies. Race-based policies still leaves open the question of whose fault it is. Mm. Reparations makes it clear there's an inherent mea culpa. And in that sense, it has spiritual and moral force, psychological and emotional power that just race-based policies does not have. And that's why I think it's so important.
And in your view, not only for the economic, righteousness of it, that we haven't paid back our debt, do you think it also would make a dent? Because there's a lot of, frankly, economic white supremacy in this country, as far as hiring practices, the income gap, all those things. So would that go away of not just evening the playing field all in one shot, but long term for Black Americans?
Reparations would not fix everything. Right. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So anywhere we see the ugly head of injustice, we must answer it as a nation, no matter who the people are, no matter what the situation is.
Hmm. So I want a bigger picture. I think we have a gentrification crisis. I've only heard Bernie Sanders talk about it. I mean, I go city to city. It's really like a tale of two cities wherever you go. You have a nice downtown area. New York City is obviously has been big on gentrification, and it seems like the country's economic order have picked winners and losers. It's priority to bring in, higher end employees so we could drive up, build luxury condos, this and that. Meanwhile, you have the majority of people living paycheck to paycheck. What would be your plan? A government jobs program, infrastructure? How do you take people and lift them so everyone isn't living in this fearful paycheck to paycheck?
Well, first of all, I think we should realize we have an economic tsunami on the way with automation. And I think that some kind of combination of universal basic income and a government jobs guarantee is absolutely essential at this point. I don't think that the establishment mind has even begun to recognize what's on its way here. And so right now we need to do more than fix the accumulated layers of injustice that have been going on for decades now. We need to repeal the tax cuts to the very, very wealthiest. We need to end these ridiculous corporate subsidies. We need universal health care, and we need it quickly. We need a massive infusion of economic hope. Because when you look at how much the average American spends in healthcare costs out of their budget, so you give universal healthcare, and all of a sudden people have more money in their pockets. That increases your consumer base. The same thing is true in terms of raising the minimum wage. The same thing is true in terms of free college. The same thing is true in terms of dealing with these college loans. However, even in doing those things, even in doing a Green New Deal, I believe that some kind of universal basic income and federal jobs guarantee is going to be necessary, because we're about to hit an iceberg here. This is beyond rough water that's coming up close.
And I want to ask you, because if there's one thing that the establishment and the oligarchy would be more scared about than Medicare for all, it would be putting a dent into the war machine. So you've talked about, well, we don't ask how we're going to pay for the wars. We are bombing 8 or 9 countries. Trump just announced we're going to leave 400 in Syria. They usually say they're going to leave less than we end up staying. That he's doubled and tripled the drone program, which actually fosters more terrorism. What are your thoughts on the military budget, defense cuts, and reimagining America as far as not being the universal policeman?
Well, just like same with healthcare, we don't have universal healthcare because of pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies. We don't fight climate change because, God forbid, we should cut into profit maximization for fossil fuel companies. So it is also that our national defense agenda has more to do with short-term profit maximization for military industrial contractors than it does with any real agenda for peace. We must wage peace. You can't just make medicine. You have to cultivate health. War is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. Our military agenda at this moment is not a peace-creating agenda. So if we want to create peace, we have a peace creation agenda, expanding economic opportunities for women, expanding educational opportunities for children, reducing violence against women, and ameliorating human suffering wherever possible. These things don't make corporate profits, but they pave the way to peace on earth. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk, because desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. So in a Williamson presidency, there is a robust partnership. Let's not forget that the first Secretary of State in this administration had been the CEO of Exxon. And the man who is even now the acting director of the Defense Department was a 30-year executive at Boeing. This is not a covert corporate takeover. This is an overt corporate takeover. And if you're going to put short-term profit maximization for corporate entities before the health and well-being of your people and your planet, expect disaster to follow.
And which brings us to money in politics, because a lot of this corporate profits is because you have federal, state, and local governments essentially bowing down to the corporations. The Democratic Party they talk about money in politics, but okay, we're not taking corporate PAC money, but we are taking money from executives from Exxon or Goldman or whatever. What are your thoughts? You're standing on stage with President Trump. how we, other than overturning Citizens United, how do we actually start ripping away at the toxic effects of money in politics?
Well, unfortunately, as you just noted, we're not going to be able to overturn Citizens United anytime soon, given the makeup of the current Supreme Court. There are state issues that have to do, state efforts that have to do with repudiating the influence of dark money, and ultimately we need to be working towards a constitutional amendment that is establishing public funding for federal campaigns. I don't think the American people need me to show them who Donald Trump is. I'm not going to contextualize this, if I am the nominee, as this fierce fight against Donald Trump. I'm going to contextualize this as an unfortunate episode in American history, and let us close it as soon as possible so that we can get about the business of renewal and repair. I don't think having this conversation with Donald Trump is really the point. Having this conversation with the American people is the point. None of this will be overridden unless there is a massive rising of political consciousness among the American people, so that the American people, both in terms of the presidential election, but also in terms of electing congresspeople and senators, know that people must be elected who will not be whores to corporate America, who will not put greed and money before human values and democratic values. And until we change that, then we're going to have a hard time in this country. But I believe that the era of chronic disengagement, chronic political disengagement on the part of so many millions of Americans who really should have known better, might possibly be coming to an end.
Mm-hmm. And where are you on the Green New Deal? Do you think it's enough or should go further?
I want a Green New Deal. In terms of the Green New Deal, I'm not totally sure. In terms of a Green New Deal, what I want is massive jobs creation. I want massive infrastructure repair. I want massive green and sustainable options. But being tied to that one particular piece of legislation, I'm not so sure. A Green New Deal, absolutely.
And are you for a ban on fracking, which is known to be a huge contributor?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, because obviously you've come nationally as kind of a spirit, knowing the pulse of the spirit and people. I think I was born in the 80s. The 80s turned a lot of people. It was that greed is good mantra and Wall Street and yachts. And
right.
Whereas the 50s and 60s, employers cared if their workers could eat. That's not an easy thing to unwind, that psychology, because I think we're a materialistic culture, and the I don't know even know if this is a word, but the Amazonization of society, where everybody just wants things air delivered by drone. How do we get back to that more connected, like it's not about how much money you make or your status, but really about your deeds to others? How do we get to that?
I agree with you about what has happened, but I don't necessarily agree with you about where the American people are. The American people have not been offered the option of doing the noble thing. In 2008, we elected Obama saying, "Here, make us a good country again." People didn't expect him to be the corporatist president that he turned out to be. So I'm not so sure that the American people will not accept the option of actually being noble, recognizing that our government and our economic system has swerved from democratic and universal human values. So I think that this is an issue of leadership. I don't put this at the feet of the American people. I put this at the feet of the traditional political establishment, which has been moving in the direction that you described and hasn't really given people the option of doing anything different. And when people were offered what they thought was the option in 2008, they did say yes to it. So let's not play the American people like we're the problem. The American people, I think, will respond to a message. I see it in Iowa, I see it in New Hampshire, see it in South Carolina, I see it in Nevada. When you say to people, we've lost our goodness, we have to put love first, we have to put humanitarian values first, we have to put being the people that God would have us be as central not only to our personal lives but to our national existence as well. Why don't we offer them that before we just assume that they won't accept it?
Right. And lastly, you need 65,000 unique donors. You need, I believe it's 200 donors in 20 states as part of that. A couple people have made that level. You have not gotten nearly the media coverage that they're. I mean, Beto O'Rourke is sleeping in these green rooms practically. Can you kind of talk about where your campaign's at, whether you want to reveal a number or not?
Yeah.
What is the feedback you're experiencing in Iowa, New Hampshire, And do you feel you have a shot? The deadline is May 15th to make those numbers to get on that debate stage.
Well, thank you. I do have the over 20 donors in over 20 states. So that part we do have. Mm-hmm. We have about half of the 65,000 unique contributors that we need. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's very difficult when you don't get the mainstream media coverage that other candidates get. I also think it's wrong. I think it's un-American, the way a certain group has appointed itself gatekeeper. You know, they say someone is a long shot. Well, who are they to say that? They say someone is not a viable candidate. Who are they to say that? So that's quite disturbing, even if it wasn't me. But I also know this. I know that dog and pony show is a whole different universe away from what happens in the living rooms and in the halls of universities and auditoriums in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Because people in those states know that they have the power. So I'm out there. And when I'm out there, nothing is saying to me, you stop, girl. Mm-hmm. So as much as the gatekeepers are saying, you go away now, I'm not feeling that from the voters in those states. So I'm in the belly of the beast, but I'm also in the arms of the angels there. I mean, I just hope that people will continue to support me, will go to Marianne2020.com, will help me. Even a $1 donation counts as one of those unique contributors and helps me and supports this campaign so that I can continue to articulate what is to the best of my ability a fiercely honest and authentic conversation about what's really wrong, so that we can, from that level of conversation, have a serious conversation about what we need to do to put America on a different path.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you for taking the time. I hope we could reconnect as you keep going, and people could get you at Marianne2020.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statusquo.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statusquo.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.